Jacob, tell me all about your podcast.
My podcast is called the Screen Rot Podcast, and it's me and my best mate, Jake, who's also a comedian. And basically each week we focus on a different content creator. So those kind of people that, you know, when you're just on your own scrolling rubbish on your phone and you find some nutter on the internet who's gone viral for doing something mental, we've basically made a show that is like deep analytics of that. It's like if Monday Night Football was about those idiots that you find on Instagram and TikTok. And so, yeah, each week we do a different one of them. We've done people like Big John, the guy who says Bosh all the time. We've done Lewis Sanderson, the TikTok guy who does those kind of like awareness videos where he pretends that his son's drowning in a swimming pool. We've done, 30 people so far. And we try and balance it. What we didn't want to do is just do a film where we just take the mick out of people every week. Do you know what I mean? We didn't want to be nasty. And we've even had people, we did an episode about a guy called El Burrito Monster, who's this geezer in Manchester who makes these like 2 foot long mental burritos. And he found it and we took the piss out of him there, but he's now like an avid listener. He listens every week and he sends us suggestions. And what we've managed to do is create a kind of a sub community of similarly minded men who spend too much time on their phones. I say men, there are women as well. And it's what's really nice is people send in suggestions of who we should cover, and we'll do that. And it's a really nice thing, mate. I mean, I've spoken to you in the past about how I used to do podcasts with BBC Sounds and stuff like that, and this is the polar opposite of that. This is much more. I mean, I say bedroom operation. We literally record it in my spare room and edit it ourselves, film it on my phone, and it's very kind of DIY and punk rock, but it's really fun as well. Tell me a little bit about the kind of changes that you've seen from doing the stuff for BBC Sounds and then sort of moving into a more independent sort of setup, and as you say, sort of more sort of DIY and sort of a bit more of a sort of punk ethos about it. Do you think that's just reflective of how the podcast industry has just changed, or tell me a little bit about how you've seen that sort of change coming in? Well, I think, I don't want to say that I'm uniquely placed, but I think the kind of journey that I've gone on with it has been, I think I've had a closer look, and certainly my income has been more dependent on the changing landscape of podcasting than most people. So, I mean, 10 years ago, podcasts just started becoming a thing and they were growing. And just before lockdown, I think big companies and big organizations were going, podcasts are the way. That's the way to go. Let's put some money into podcasts. And so in 2018, 2019, the BBC started BBC Sounds. And at the time, I'd just done the BBC New Comedy Awards, which is like a little competition for new comedians, and the finals on Radio 4, and they film it up at the Edinburgh Fringe. And so I'd been in that. And so when they got a bit of money to make BBC Sounds, which was going to be like this almost Spotify that's owned by the BBC and has a real focus on podcasting, and they were going to create original shows, that they were going to make themselves. They very much looked at that sort of new talent list, that had come up in things like the New Comedy Awards, and went, right, who's got some ideas? So an email went round, a couple of messages went back and forth, and then me and a producer that I sort of knew from the BBC, we started a show called Jacob Hawley on Drugs, which was my show. And the idea was it was like a sort of a look at UK drug culture with a sort of comedic angle. The thing is, at this point, you would have been commissioned to do that, and there would have been, been guaranteed money. Oh yeah, mate. It was, it didn't start off anything crazy, but it was, a little bit of money, a few £100 for each episode. But the 2019, we didn't really know what podcasts were or what they were supposed to be, if that makes sense. The guy I was working with had done a lot of stuff with Radio 4, and I think what we made by accident was a Radio 4 show. I mean, you can go back and listen to it, and I'm still very proud of Jacob Hawley on Drugs, but it was a bit, because we were having to, if you try and do a show about drugs on the BBC, you've got a lot of red tape, you've got a lot of legal stuff you've got to be careful with. So I couldn't just go and take the mick. I couldn't just take the piss. It had to have a level of sincerity to it, and we had to do a lot of research. I mean, there was one episode where I interviewed the parents of a young lad that I went to school with who died whilst taking MDMA, and we interviewed them at the crematorium, where where he's cremated. So stuff like that. You're not being funny, but you're also doing a lot of work in terms of research. And the way that the show was made, it was very heavily produced. There was a soundtrack, there was a voiceover that I would do to kind of narrate the show. Then we'd do 3 or 4 different interviews. And it was really popular. I mean, we were 12th in the iTunes charts, which feels bonkers now. Like, it was mad. 250,000 downloads in the first year. It was ridiculous. And it grew, and we kept doing it. And the money grew, and it was good. And we kept, we got to do more stuff and bigger stuff and travel the country interviewing different people. But then, lockdown hits, and I think lockdown just changed everything, because I think what happened was so many sort of celebrities and, people who would usually be doing TV, they suddenly went, well, I can't do TV. I can't get on a film set. So why not make a podcast? They started exploding. I think people had so much more spare time. They were listening to a lot more podcasts. And then post-lockdown, I think the market just completely changed. That top 20, top 50 list is now celebrities. People with a huge profile. There wouldn't be space for a young comedian like me to just have an idea for a show and get into 12 in the iTunes charts. So I think what happened was people that were on my kind of level, that were using podcasts as a kind of come up, as a way of finding an audience, there was no space for them at BBC Sounds or with big publishing houses or Audible or places like that. So they went underground. They started just making it themselves. And that then became the reason you would listen to a new podcaster. You'd listen to someone who was in my position because it was so authentic and homemade, and they'd have a sort of community listenership. And it was just very interesting. I made 2 more series for BBC Sounds. And again, still very proud of them all. But I think looking back now, I'm like, that I wouldn't do it like that now. I think if I had an idea like that now, I would do it myself. But also, I think I underestimated how much doing something with the BBC does mean you can't upset people. You have to be very sensitive. And it also means you can't be authentic. You can't be yourself, because you're having to write a script of what you're going to say and pass it by lawyers and pass it by exec producers. Whereas the successful podcasts that I listen to now, there's no editing. Do you know what I mean? That's the whole point. Yeah. It is raw. And so, I think it's changed massively, and changed for the better. I was hugely lucky that 4 years ago I was I won the golden ticket and I got to make something with the BBC. I was hugely lucky. But now it's like the gatekeepers are gone. Anyone can do it. Anyone can use social media to find an audience, and the audience now gets something that's undiluted. I
think that's so important what you said there, because for me that lockdown was definitely the sort of the big switch. And I think, as you say, we then saw people that, a lot of celebrities that would have 10 years ago made a fitness DVD at Christmas or a calendar, they've now got a podcast instead. And the thing that I find tricky with that is that at Pop Bubble, we get sent so many press releases from this big celebrities launching this podcast with this huge organisation, and they're getting paid a lot of money to put this podcast together. Now, I think some of them are great, but some of them, they're just a gig, and it's not got that kind of that passion and listeners can pick up on that. If they're just ticking the box that I'm going to do a podcast, like as Katie Price famously said at the podcast show last year, I don't listen to podcasts, and it's like, you've got a podcast, like surely you must have listened to one. But it's like, right, it's Katie Price, we can give her X amount of money, and it's going to be huge, and it probably will be. But I think it's when you hear them people that are just doing it because they really give a shit, that's when you get the really good stuff. And I think that's to go right the way back to that sort of punk ethos. Like, it's almost like your BBC Sounds and these Spotify's and that are the major labels. And whereas everybody else is operating on these, creation and all of these little sort of independent labels, and I really like that. I think that's where you get the new and exciting stuff. And ultimately, a lot of them people will create these small podcasts, and then after a period of time, they will get picked up by a major label or whatever you want to call them. And
maybe if that's the right way. I mean, as I say, we're about to launch Patreon with ours now. And that's because, we've had a little bit of interest from producers and people like that. But I think the way to go is to keep it in the hands of the consumer, keep it in the hands of the people that listen to it, let them be the one that funds it, and let them, them essentially being shareholders and stakeholders in it, because they're the ones putting the money into it. I mean, I've we've only been doing it a few months, Screen Rot, my new show, but not just the listenership, but how invested the listeners are compared to, as I say, with the BBC one that I used to do, we get millions of people listening to it, but they weren't invested. I mean, I used to read the reviews, obviously, and I obviously only paid attention to the bad ones. And there weren't many, but there was one. I remember there was one sort of 2 or 3 star review. And I just, this sort of cut through so much. This person commented and they've gone, I like the show. It's good that the BBC are doing a show about drugs. I just wish they had a different host. and it was called Jacob Hawley on drugs. But what was interesting is because it was so heavily produced, because there were photo shoots, because it had a soundtrack, because people thought it was the one show. You know what I mean? People thought it was just a BBC production where they'd found a host. They didn't realise it was my baby. It was an idea that I'd had before podcasts. I wanted to make a TV show initially. So it's whereas with Screen Rot, as I say, it's only been a few months and the listenership's grown. But we got a message the other day from this lad who, he was like, "Hi lads, just wanted to get in touch. Basically, me and my mates like the podcast so much, we've created a group chat just about the podcast." And he messaged me and he goes, "This might feel weird to you, mate. We've created a spreadsheet where we've listed all the episodes, and we haven't listed it based on our favourite episode, but we've listed it based on how much we think you hate the content creator you're talking about." And he sent us this spreadsheet, and it's just and they've set up a sort of a colour code for which things we dislike about it in there. And it's just they're so... And he sent us some screenshots from the group chat where they're debating stuff, and then one of them said to the other, "What are we doing with our lives?" Just debating this small podcast, but it's a level of commitment to it and people that are into it that I didn't have with that big show.
I love the fact that you really adore their commitment and stuff like that. You've not given them your home address or phone number, though, have you?
No. Well, no. But I mean, on the show, we dox ourselves accidentally all the time. But no, it's just a level of investment that I didn't have with that big show, and it's that thing of when you find a small band or a small musician or whatever that you feel like they're on the come up and they kind of need you in your band, and you give them more. And I tour as a stand up, and I've had people come to the tours who stay till the end. And Jake, who I did a podcast with, he's my support act on tour. And I think the nicest thing has been people wanting pictures with him after the tour shows because they know him from the podcast, and people bringing us presents of stuff that we mentioned on the show. And it's just, I think it's a really, really lovely thing that's happening with podcasting now, where it has created those communities. It does offer a level of engagement that you can't have with something you listen to from a big label or something you watch on TV. You can't be that invested. You can't send your favourite TV show a spreadsheet of the episodes you like. Whereas on our level, you can, for better or worse.
It is community, though.
I have to double lock the back door now, but it does mean that people are interested.
It is community, though, Jacob, and I think that's really important. And one of the I'm a big sort of advocate of Patreon. I think it's a really good thing to do. And anybody that sort of approaches me as a podcaster or as somebody for Pod that works at Pod Bubble, they'll go, "Oh, look, what's the best way to monetize my podcast? We've got X amount of listeners, and where do we go now?" And I'll always say, do you think you could do a live show? Do you think you could, do something with that? Or Patreon? Because Patreon just offers so much more opportunity to really engage with that community and build that community. What sort of stuff are you going to be doing within the Patreon for the Patreons?
So as I say, the way the show works at the moment, we do one episode a week about a different content creator, but at the top of each episode, we do about 10, 15 minutes of just chatting rubbish. And essentially, we're going to have an extra episode each week just for Patreons, which is us chatting rubbish, which is a more kind of standard podcast format. Yeah. But you know what it's like, that bit of the show kind of has now grown and grown and grown to the point where we're really having to sort of cut it down. So that's going to be a thing on its own. And that's more just me and Jake, whine to each other after talk about our lives. So there'll be an extra episode each week. And the other thing, and this has been something people have really asked for and are really keen for, we're going to create a kind of group chat I haven't decided yet whether we're going to do that via Discord or whether we're going to do a WhatsApp group that we control the entry to. But we're going to create a group chat where the listeners can then just throw their own content. You know, when they find something on TikTok, they can throw it in there and everyone can take the piss together. And we can then start featuring stuff from that on the episodes. And so people can really start feeding the show. They can almost have a bit of agency in terms of what we're going to do, and they can feed us lines. And it means that, you know, we can say, all right, you know, Jack, who sent this in, he actually mentioned that how funny it is when this content creator does this. And so people can almost get involved a lot more. And the other thing, we've got a live show we're going to be doing in August at the Bill Murray Comedy Club in Islington. And we've got Josh Pugh, who's a mate of mine, a fantastic comedian. He's going to come on and talk about some of his favourite content. So, yeah, we that's going to be exclusive to Patreons, the ticket link for that as well. So I think we've got some fun stuff in there. The group chat's the thing I'm really looking forward to, because that's been something everyone's really asked for. And I think that's going to become a real horrible pit of nastiness, but also very funny.
Wonderful. And so the podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, right?
Absolutely.
And the Patreon, is that up and live? Is that ready to go?
That's going to be live very soon. So yeah, you'll be able to find the Screen Rot podcast on Patreon, and that'll be in the episode notes of every episode of the pod as well.
And if people want to keep up to speed with you, Jacob, where's the best place to do that?
Instagram, best place for me. Instagram, Jacob Hawley, Hawley for Hawley. And yeah, I do, as well as the podcast on there, I do all sorts of content and crap that people sometimes enjoy. So yeah, have a check out of that.
Fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Jacob.
Nice one, mate. Thank you.